to take up our last session on the role of anesthesiologist in a disaster management in OR. So, brief introduction of Madam. Madam is a mechanical engineer turned healthcare professional with extensive experience in quality management and accreditation. She is the quality manager and associate general superintendent of CMC Vellore. She had developed several training programs, including the basic and advanced certified professionals for quality implementation in hospital programs or for CAHO, and involved in various training and quality implementation programs across the country. She is the recipient of Young Quality Achiever Award. And with this, I request Madam Lallu Joseph to carry on the session forward. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Debatta, and congratulations to the Quality Professionals Division of CAHO for such a wonderful webinar series, the Continuing Quality Education series. Amazing sessions I've been listening from the beginning, and thanks to Dr. Pratibha Kane, Dr. Anita, Edward, Dr. Balavenkat and the entire team. Amazing sessions. So being the last speaker, I think it's going to be very difficult to hold your attention. My talk is going to be very straightforward. It's going to be on emergency management, and I thought I'll give a broad overview. Is my presentation visible, Debatta? And I will broadly talk about the role of anesthesiologist in disaster management, particularly in a OR situation in the operating room. Before that, I have to give some prelude to what I'm going to be speaking about, and I'm going to touch upon what are disasters, internal, external. Learning from disasters, have we reached there? Have we learned from the mistakes we have committed? The 4 phases of emergency management, role of anesthesiologist in disaster management, and how do you conduct mock drills. There are several sessions that CAHO has conducted on how to actually conduct mock drills, because we as assessors, when we go for the assessment of hospitals, the glaring thing that we come across is the intent with which mock drills are conducted. Now, it's either happening in the car park or in an open area, and when the code is called, the teams arrive, and with that, it's done. You just note down, in 3 minutes, the fire team arrived, in 4 minutes, this team arrived, and then just document that. With that, the response is just documented for the sake of some documentation to show the SSS. That's not the intent, and there's a huge learning from the experiences of different hospitals that have actually gone through disasters in the past. So I'm going to touch upon all these components in the limited time that's given in front of me. So first thing is, what is a disaster? All of us know a disaster is a sudden accident or a natural catastrophe that causes great damage or loss to life. Disasters have uncanny ability to bring to the forefront the vulnerabilities of our systems, processes, and people, whatever we have in our own hospitals. And when we talk about disasters, hospitals are no exception at all. When hospitals are affected, the repercussions are multifold, and they are both classified as natural and human-made. For the benefit of describing a disaster scenario in a particular hospital, it could be both ways. It could be internal disaster or external disaster. When we talk about internal disaster or external disaster, these are both unforeseen situations. Nobody has predicted that this could happen. And when it comes to internal disaster, it is limited to only that hospital facility. Whereas external disaster, the hospital may or may not be affected. I'll give some examples of that. But the hospital becomes a critical part of a larger response to handle the disaster. So in external, hospital may be involved, may not be involved. However, hospital becomes a critical part of managing the disaster. Patients will come in, mass casualty may be called. So we actively engage ourselves in treating the patients who come. Both can disrupt or shut down hospital. And examples of internal disasters often are explosions that happen in the hospital. It could be a fire accident. It could be a structural collapse in a hospital. And when we talk about external disaster, predominantly these are the earthquakes, the flooding, a mass accident that takes place, plane crash, or there is maybe a bus and a van and with some 16, 17 people, a mass casualty happening. All these can become part of the external disaster and also the terrorism part. Let's look at 2 examples. The first one is the AMRI Hospital, Kolkata. This happened in front of all of us. Most of us are witness to what happened. On December 9, 2011, almost 90 plus people lost their lives. At 3:30 a.m., the smoke started. 4:10, the fire brigade arrived. 4:30, the rescue process started. And till 7:30, the firemen could not actually get in, mainly because of all the structural problems that they had. The cars were parked around the setback, and the alerting mechanism itself was a little late. So by the time they came in, it was too late. And at 7:30, the firemen broke open the wall of the basement and started flooding the wall. They could not enter due to smoke and poisonous gases. And at 8 a.m., the snorkel arrived and rescued by breaking the facade, and too many other interventions happened after that. So this is an internal disaster limited to that particular hospital. Now look at the Chennai floods. When the Chennai floods happened, in a particular hospital in Chennai, there were 575 patients who were admitted, and 75 of them were in ICU. And now most hospitals were flooded. They did not have the mechanism to transfer these patients, and 57 patients luckily were transferred and 18 patients died. It's because of the basement flooding that happened, because of the Adyar river that breached, and it flooded the basement of the international block in the hospital. No power, no oxygen, no network, and no transport. Now here, because the other hospitals were also affected, it became a major catastrophe because they did not have beds too, and there was no transport facility available. So this is a typical example of an external disaster. So when we talk about emergency management, the 4 phases, we talk about the mitigation phase, which is the first one, which is to prevent emergencies from happening. These are steps that are taken to prevent any emergency within the hospital setting, which is putting up fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, alarms, hooters, so that we prevent incidents from happening. The second one is the preparedness phase, which is to take actions ahead of time to be ready for any emergency. If at all the emergency happened, do we have mechanisms in place to handle that before it goes out of control? Do all the staff know their roles and responsibilities in an emergency? So that's the second phase of preparedness. The third phase is the response. What do we do when such things happen to protect the people, the property in the wake of an emergency, a disaster, or a crisis? And the fourth phase, now the disaster has happened, emergency has happened. Are we functioning within our limited capability? And after the disaster is over, after the floods come to a close, how are we going to rebuild? How are we going to recover and return back to normal phase? So these are the 4 phases that we call as the 4 pillars of emergency management. And in order to be prepared, we need to have 5 steps and look at it very, very carefully. First thing is, as hospitals, we need to know the risk that are inherent in our system. Now, in a place like Vellore, we may not be too conscious and careful about terrorist attack. But in a place like probably Jammu or Srinagar, the hospitals there have to know the risk of a terrorist attack or a problem, a bomb, or some gunman getting into the place. So we don't have to invest on screening every visitor or putting up metal detectors everywhere, whereas in a hospital in Jammu or Srinagar, that is needed. So every setup, or in Mumbai with all these floods, they have to be prepared to handle the floods. So knowing the risk is the first step. Then building the team. With every disaster, it's a separate set of team that comes together. How do you build the team? How do you prepare the plans and the protocols? Now you prepare the plans and protocols. Many of us have this habit of copying and pasting from other hospitals, which doesn't work at all. It has to be very, very context specific to our own setting. Now, in order to do that, we have to test the plans. You write down the protocol, you look at the context of your own hospital, you test the plans in your setting, and then you start updating everybody about the plans. And the first thing is, what is the first responder's role when an emergency happens? And how do you put the team together? How do you bring them all together? So these are the 5 steps to emergency preparedness. Now coming to anesthesiologists and the role of anesthesiologists in theatre. Now, because we are NABH accredited hospitals, most of us have a disaster management plan. But let me tell you the ground reality. how I got involved in this particular exercise is that I had gone for an assessment to a hospital in Bhubaneswar. And when I asked them, how, let's assume there is fire. There were 13 patients connected to the dialysis machines there. No nephrologists there, all nephrology techs were there. And when I asked them, how do you handle a fire in case there is a fire here? And they all said, we'll call this number 300. I said, okay, call number 300. They called number 300 and the team came rushed in with extinguishers. Now I said, the fire is spreading, the smoke is spreading. What are you going to do? None of them actually knew the protocols as to what they would do to those patients. So the response they gave was, we'll wait for some time, let the blood go back. It's 150 ml of blood that's in the machine. So since none of us actually have the ability to understand our own roles in such situations, our hospitals are almost becoming like furnaces. We don't do mock drills in our own ORs. What is the role of an anesthetist when there is a midpoint case? What is the role of a surgeon? What is the role of a dialysis technician to evacuate a patient who is midpoint probably in a dialysis, or a brachytherapy patient, or a patient who's undergoing a heart-lung CABG and connected to a heart-lung machine? Have we ever thought through it? That is the biggest problem. So the OR disaster management plan is a very, very specific disaster management plan that needs to be put together, which means this is a closed environment. You are handling life and death there. How do you actually manage the patients? Where do you move them? How do you manage emergency supplies? What is the role of the anesthetist? Who takes the responsibility for evacuation? Who's the champion of the ship? Is it going to be the surgeon who's the commander-in-chief, or is it going to be the anesthetist who's the commander-in-chief? You cannot decide then. So the teamwork is most important, and before we do that, we need to put down and define the protocols and make sure everybody is aware of the protocols. So when we talk about the role of anesthesiologist in disaster management, they go together. Anesthesiologists, all of us know, are uniquely qualified to participate in a disaster response. They are well suited to manage disasters in a OR environment. Not just in the OR environment, even when it comes to external disaster management. So the anesthesiologists are extremely good with the airway management, the regional techniques. They can double as critical care specialists. They can manage emergencies, cardiac emergencies, resuscitate people. They can triage in an external emergency situation as to who needs immediate attention and who can be, waiting for some time. Because they know the end-to-end process in an OR, they can manage the entire flow very, very well, because that's the main thing they do. And with regards to OR logistics and OR management, there are several studies available on the role of anesthesiologists for disaster management when it particularly comes to external disasters. Now let's look at this particular interesting study of 467 hospitals from low and middle income countries. Look at the situation where this study talks about only 50% of the hospitals having reliable electricity, and which, when we talk about reliable electricity, at least 2 power outages per week. 61 hospitals with oxygen source, reliable, uninterrupted. 51% of hospitals with functioning pulse oximeters, and 73 reported ketamine as the most frequently used anesthetic. So these are low and middle income situations, and the anesthetists who are there can manage any situation, because that's the level of working environment that is available in most small, medium setup, not just in our country, but in the entire low and middle income countries. In such a setting, even in a disaster, let's assume an armed conflict, the type of anesthetics delivered vary significantly from what is provided in a stable environment with a resource-rich environment to what on the ground can actually happen. So anesthetists are used to this situation of handling emergencies with the limited resources they have, and they actually become frontliners when it comes to external disasters. MSF data on response to the 2010 earthquake talks about, the massive earthquake that happened. When problems happened, many of these patients needed surgery, and 66% of anesthetics were actually general anesthetic that was given, and they were not intubated. 21% was spinal, 9% general anesthesia with endotracheal intubation. So the anesthetists who are in the low and middle income country can safely handle disasters, external disasters, in a very good way. So I talked about their role when it comes to the broad skills that they have. which they can widely apply when it comes to performing procedures or to manage patients requiring intensive care. They can double up as intensivists. As airway specialists, they are the best. In events requiring rapid patient triage, they can assess depending on the degrees of hemodynamics instability and people who require urgent intervention. And they are extremely good in patient flow, which is why anesthetists have a very, very major role when it comes to external disasters like earthquakes, floods. When the mass casualty incident happened in Calicut, there were about 40 patients who were operated in one of the hospitals in Kozhikode. And the entire theatre team got together and it was solely run by the anesthetists. The entire, and this is a CAHO study that is published as a case study. So therefore, there is no doubt that anesthesiologist is the incident commander for emergencies in OR. Now we are coming to the internal situation when there's an emergency in our own hospital. So because the anesthetists are the ones who are on the ground 24/7, they know the setup well. They have very good interaction with the nurses, the technologists. They know in and out of the theatre. It's not the surgeons who actually live there. It is the anesthetists. And for them, it is their, home away from home. So they typically should be the incident commander for emergencies in OR. So what are the various roles that they can take when emergencies happen in a hospital setting? They become part of the decision-making team. It is a senior anesthetist, obviously, along with the senior surgeon and supervisors who can take the decision to evacuate the patients when there is a problem. And liaising with the fire officers based on the level of fire or any disaster, ordering for evacuation should become a consultative decision between the anesthetist, the surgeon, and the nurses on the floor. Now, once the decision is taken, the role of the anesthetist within the OR is so critical. They become the incident commander for that particular case, for that particular OR. They take control and guide the evacuation process. They have to liaise with the floor nurse and on the information of the evacuation exit, which is the alternate theatre. Are they moving the patient out from this theatre to an alternate site? How are they going to move? And also to make sure that the oxygen and nitrous and other things are managed properly and supplies are gathered. So all these things will be well managed if the anesthetist takes charge of the situation. And when we talk about managing this, it's not just that you write a protocol and all the anesthetist surgeons and the nurses are aware of the protocol. It is important that you do a simulation exercise, and that's the most valuable tool in preparing for the actual event. And it improves the abilities to manage disaster. Are we there? Certainly no. You look at any protocol from any hospital, it's a broad disaster management protocol that is available. Very specific to OR environment, it is very limited to certain hospitals that really focus on disaster management, and that's the need of the hour, and I think that's something that we need to focus on. Mock drills. We really need to work on this very, very well. And one of the most gripping stories of disaster management planning is that of Rick Rescola, who actually saved about 2,687 Morgan Stanley employees when the World Trade Center accident happened. Here, he had done mock drills, and there was another incident that happened in 1993, and ever since it happened, he knew it was going to happen. So he would religiously do mock drills every 3 months, and therefore when the real incident happened on September 11, he was able to save all the 2,687 Morgan Stanley employees. So that is the testament of mock drills. And mock drills, we have to understand, it is a practice session for us to actually understand our roles and responsibility and make sure we do the right things and we all understand the protocols. So why mock drills? I'm not going to get into it because all of us know the importance of doing mock drills. We know the environment we are working in. Patients are weak. They need our support to evacuate them. Presence of many relatives and visitors who are there, very less number of staff who are available to move the patients out, and also the equipment available in the theatre and other environment adds to the vulnerability in the situation. So we can do tabletop exercises, we can do functional drills, or we should be doing full-scale drill to make sure that we are ready. I have a very beautiful session on how to conduct mock drills, and I'll ask the CAHO Secretariat to share that in the group. And you need to understand that you have to have checklists to assess the impact of the mock drills, pass on the information to the stakeholders on the ground so that they are aware of the mistakes that have been committed and they can correct the response to the actual situation. So the observation sheets are important, the debriefing is extremely crucial, and also to modify the protocol based on the observations that have come in. With this, I want to close my talk, and I would like to insist that we all know that it wasn't raining when Noah built the ark. So we have to be ready to face disasters and emergencies at any given point in time. And particularly the role of anesthetists is extremely crucial when it comes to disaster management in the OR situation. I congratulate Dr. Suvin, Dr. Darshana, Dr. Anita Shirley, Dr. Rahul, and the entire team, Dr. Anuradha, Dr. Anna, and the entire Quality Professionals Division for such a brilliant session today. And best wishes to all the speakers, and thank you very much for giving me this session.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for highlighting the crucial aspects of disaster management, and specifically you had beautifully explained the importance of mock drills and the role of key stakeholder, which is very important. And with this note, we had come to end of the session of today's session. And for giving vote of thanks, I would like to request Dr. Darshana Rathore, our organizing secretary. She is the additional director of Department of Critical Care Medicine, HM Reliance Foundation Hospital, Mumbai. So, Dr. Darshana, please.
Thank you, Debatta, and thank you, Kaho, for giving us a good opportunity for a specialty-wise discussion on patient safety. And it was a very well-planned session with all the organizers. Dr. Anita Shirley had taken a very good initiative. Dr. Rahul Deshmukh also had given us a lot of insight on how to go about and cover all the aspects. Thanks to the knowledge partners, ESQA and ISA, also Indian Society of Anesthesiologists, and we could get a good number of people to attend the sessions. And in this session, very important was that everything was covered from a point of a technician, from a point of a nurse. And Dr. Pratibha Kane also gave a good insight on the medical legal aspects that need to be covered. And definitely the session where a panel discussion was done by moderated by Dr. Bal Venkat, Dr. J. Bal Venkat. So overall, a very good session. Thanks to Debatta for hosting this session, and looking forward for many more sessions. Thanks a lot. Thank you everyone for attending and making it a success program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Darshana. Thank you for the vote of thanks. Thanks to the CAHO Secretariat. Thanks to the CAHO leadership. Thanks to the CAHO Quality Professional Wing, specifically Dr. Suvin, Dr. Anuradha. Sincere thanks from my end. And thank you so much.
Thank you
all. Thanks a lot.
Lallu, thank you.